The Russians' objective has been very clearly articulated in very simple terms so that like a 4-year-old can understand it. The fact that Europeans are always coming up with these non-solutions is because they don't want the war to end. It's that simple. So they come up with peace proposals that they already know that the Russians will reject. And so Vladimir Putin says, if we can't come to an agreement, well, we're going to achieve our objective by military means. This is exactly what the Europeans want. They want the war to continue. That's the key point. These aren't peace plans. They're delay tactics. Alex Krainer is saying the terms are designed to be rejected. If peace were the goal, the proposals would look very different. In simple terms, the war continues because ending it isn't what some leaders actually want. When the war started in 2022, under the British Defense Department, they formed a team, which was named Project Alchemy, and they produced a document, like a strategy document, in which the main theme was that they have to keep Ukraine fighting at whatever cost. They have to keep Ukraine fighting. So no peace, no agreements, no negotiations, war. And it seems to me very obvious that this is exactly what they're doing, and they're continuing to do it. And then you have, European diplomats who have basically broken off their relationship with Russia. You have European Union's chief diplomat, Kaja Kallas, who is explicitly saying, oh, we're reaching out to all these countries and we're trying to persuade them not to engage with the Russians. I mean, if that's your head diplomat, you know that you're in a lot of trouble. But if you're refusing diplomacy, that means that your only one objective is war. That says it all. When diplomacy is rejected by design, war becomes the goal. Alex Krainer is pointing out that cutting off talks with Russia isn't a failure. It's intentional, and they even know that they can't win that war. They understand that. They want to keep it going for a number of reasons. Because for as long as the war is going on, they think that they are weakening Russia and that they can eventually somehow destabilize Russia by whatever means. And then also it's a hugely profitable, because for as long as war is going on, they can justify all these hundreds of billions that they're pouring into Ukraine, a lot of which is being laundered back to them off for this and that, a contract, a commission, whatever they collect. And so they all have a vested interest that this gravy train keeps rolling. This is the darkest part. They know the war can't be won, and they don't care. Alex Krainer is pointing out that as long as the fighting continues, it weakens Russia and feeds a massive money pipeline. When war becomes profitable, ending it is no longer the incentive. There are two big players in this equation, and that's Russia and the United States. And now the Americans perfectly understand what Russian security concerns are like everybody else does. And I think that the Trump administration, unlike the Europeans, have a certain respect for that, and that they have been trying to establish good constructive relations with the Russians, but they also understand that if peace negotiations are sabotaged, that the Russians are going to achieve their objectives by force. So they said, okay, fine, Europeans, you want to have it that way, have it your way, but no, it's going to end up in Russian favor anyway. This strips the illusion away. There are only two real decision makers here. Alex Krainer is saying Washington understands Russia's security concerns and also understands the outcome if talks are blocked. In simple terms, sabotage diplomacy and the battlefield decides. So I think that of the Trump administration is not that keen on bringing Europe on board because they know that the Russians are going to prevail one way or another. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter to the United States from their security point of view. And so all of these plans and agreements and schemes that they are contriving are not going to go anywhere because they're talking about putting their troops on the ground once the peace is concluded. Well, the peace won't be concluded. And when it does get concluded at some point in the future, it's going to be between the Russians and the government in Kyiv, whoever that's going to be. And it's going to be concluded with the Americans, and then there's going to be a change in Kyiv. And so, they will not be if a new government in Kyiv, a future one that will happen after the next Elections whenever they happen if that. Government is favorable to Moscow if. It comes back into Russian orbit there. Not going to allow a French and British and German troops on Ukraine's territory. They can only do this if they achieve peace and they keep Zelensky in power, or somebody like Zelensky who is going to remain loyal to them. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I think that you have two strong players, Russia and the United States, and then you have a handful of very, very weak players who are out of money, out of weapons, who have no militaries of any, respectable size, and who are also extremely unpopular with their own domestic constituencies. This makes the power imbalance clear. Alex Krainer is saying Europe isn't being sidelined by accident. It's being sidelined because it has no leverage. In the end, outcomes are decided by those with power, not those with plans. So, I think they're not going to last long. Merit, Macron, Starmer, they're not going to be in power for very much longer. And I have reasons to believe that people in the Trump administration know that, and that they will actually help their opposition to come in power and form new governments, and then, everything changes. And the reason why I think so is because when was it 2 weeks ago when a Kushner and a Witkoff were in Moscow and spent 5 hours discussing things with Vladimir Putin. We learned that one of the things that they were discussing was reconnecting Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany. Well, if they were having that discussion without any representative of the German government, that tells me that the American government is already counting on a regime change in Germany that so that Friedrich Merz to them is irrelevant. So he can talk what he wants. He can vote for whatever peace agreement he wants. He can lobby, but ultimately it's not going to amount to much. This is blunt power politics. Alex Krainer is suggesting Western leaders like Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer are already being treated as temporary when talks about Nord Stream happen with Vladimir Putin without Germany at the table. It signals one thing: decisions are being made with future governments in mind, not the current ones. Zelensky is an obstacle, and we have to remember that Zelensky is probably a British agent. After he got elected in 2019, one of the first trips he took was to London. And in October of 2020, 2019, he went for a meeting not with the British Prime Minister, who I think at the time was Boris Johnson. He went for a 2-hour meeting with Sir Richard Moore, who was the head of MI6. That's very unusual. That's very strange, but it's very indicative that he spent time talking to the chief of the British Foreign Intelligence Agency, and we don't know what they discussed. The Zelensky got caught. It was the Ukrainian media who broke this story, and then Zelensky said, oh yes, we were talking about peace and stability for Ukraine, blah, 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 let's say the publicly acceptable justifications, but still you should have talked to maybe British Prime Minister, or maybe they're ahead of their foreign office, or a cabinet meeting with the defense ministers for that, not MI6. That's British foreign intelligence. This is a serious allegation, and it matters. Alex Krainer is questioning priorities, not proving guilt. A newly elected leader meeting the head of MI6, Richard Moore, instead of figures like Boris Johnson, Rezabro. At the very least, it suggests influence, operating behind diplomacy, not through it. So it's British intelligence who concocted this Project Alchemy that says keep Ukraine fighting at all cost. That's his task. That is his assignment. Keeping Ukraine fighting at all cost. And so, of course, he's protected from the, let's say, democratic will of the Ukrainian people by Taurian Guard, which I understand are also British mercenaries. Although, I don't know that for sure, That's just kind of one of those stories that's going around. But for sure, he's protected, because otherwise he would end up like Mussolini, like the people would tear him apart if they could, but they can't. This is where claims turn serious and need restraint. Alex Krainer is arguing that Zelensky's role is defined by keeping the war going, but these are allegations, not verified facts. What is clear, though, is this: when leaders are insulated from public pressure during wartime, accountability disappears, and conflict becomes self-perpetuating. The problem for the people in power today is that they're losing control of the narrative, and this is everything to them, because it was the last year. At Davos, you had Ursula von der Leyen and John Kerry and a number of these people who were pretty much having like a senior tantrum about misinformation and disinformation. And I think that Ursula even said that a misinformation and disinformation and is now a greater threat to them even than Russia and the international terrorism. This is the real pressure point. Power depends on controlling the story. Alex Krainer is pointing out that when leaders like Ursula von der Leyen and John Kerry label dissent as misinformation, it signals fear, not confidence. When the narrative slips, authority follows. So this is a huge problem for them. And I think that Colonel Jacobo is what has been one of the clearest voices out there for truth, to explain to people what is going on, what is true, what is false. And I think that he has a certain authority because he used to work for NATO. He used to be involved in many of these crisis points around the world. So he has a certain experience and knowledge and authority. So his voice counted very, very much. I think we all learned a great deal from Jacques Paul. And so they decided to silence him. And so they sanction him to make it impossible for his voice to be heard. Well, the same thing in the end, it's going to come back and it's going to boomerang, I think, because now people realize if you didn't know about Jacoby before now, maybe you're going to find out. And then people, like every time you been something, it's like that Trisend effect, that now people are curious, like, okay, so what was he saying that they went so hard against him and silenced him? Same as when they fired Tucker Carlson from Fox News. Did they silence him? Not really. I think it's even gotten worse for them. And so I think that you have the same case with Candace Owens. Exactly. There you have it. And so I think that this is something very, very important, because what it tells us is that we are winning. We meaning ordinary people who want to know the truth and who want to discover the truth. Nobody likes to be lied to, and especially when they tell you, oh, you're going to have to sacrifice your children. Yeah, and you're lying to me about why I have to sacrifice your children? I don't think so. And so, I think that they're desperate. They don't know what to do. The knee-jerk reaction is to silence the voices who are sharing the inconvenient truth. But I think that in the end, it's going to be counterproductive. It's going to rely real result with a lot of unintended consequences and opposite outcomes. This is what desperation looks like. Alex Krainer points to voices like Jacu Bode, insiders with real experience, being silenced instead of debated. That's not strength. That's panic. And history shows this backfires every time. When figures like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens are pushed out, curiosity only grows. When power tries to suppress truth, it's usually because the narrative is already slipping and ordinary people can feel